Hey, thanks for checking out Nuts and Bolts with Tone, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to talk about a 2014 Honda Civic Hybrid. So, work on a lot of Toyota hybrids, and Toyota seems to be a lot simpler. Obviously there's a lot more Toyota hybrids out there than there are Hondas, but Toyota seems to be a lot simpler. When you have a hybrid battery fail or a hybrid component fail, it generally will throw a code in most modules, and it's a similar code basically saying that there's a fault in the high voltage system. And sometimes you'll get, some other random codes, low voltage codes, things like that. But it doesn't set a whole, zigzag pattern of codes in all modules leading to all different kinds of things. So this is the second Honda Civic Hybrid that I've had to diagnose. And the first one, it got into the point where we were going to have to go in and start disconnecting inverter cables and all this crazy stuff and all this testing, and we just kicked it to the dealer because it was really confusing on these Hondas. And so this one here, it had it initially came in for it died while driving and wouldn't restart, and so I got it, and it had a lot of codes. In the ABS code, it had a code for the modulator unit power source circuit low. It had a code saying there was a PCM malfunction. In the power steering module, it had a code for the VSA system failure, and random other codes. But in the IMA computer, which is the hybrid computer, it had a code P1440 for motor inverter MPI module short circuit, P15A5 for motor current sensor circuit malfunction, and a P1440 for motor power inverter MPI module output circuit malfunction. So I found a TSB that extends a warranty for a P1440 for 15 years, 150,000 miles. Unfortunately, this one's it's under the 15 years, it's over the 150,000 miles, and so we tore into it. And the first step was basically the first step was to clear all the codes and start it up and let it idle for 1 minute with the blower motor on high, the high beams on high, and the rear defroster on for 1 minute. When you get done with that, I want you to scan it. So it has in the flow chart, in the TSB, it has a whole list of codes. And it says if any of these codes are present, go to this link, which takes you to a diagnostic saying the TSB doesn't apply. But if only a 1440 is there, then you continue with the TSB. Basically, the TSB is saying that inside of this MPI module, which the original one has a black cover, which is also the inverter, it has a bad solder joint, and that's what causes this problem. And their test is pretty much if it has a 1440 and no other codes, you're just going to go in there and you're going to replace that module. There's really no testing for the TSB. However, we're not performing the TSB, we are performing testing, so we got into it. All right, so the first step, and I'll show you in a minute what it looks like in the car, but basically what we had to do was take the back seats out to access the cover that hides all the hybrid system. Then you're going to turn the switch off, take the cover off, and take the big plate off that covers the hybrid system. And then once you do that, I'll show you once it's in the car, but you're going to disconnect the 3 motor cable, the motor stator current cables. And there's 3 of them side by side. It's a U, a V, and a W. Pretty much what you're going to do is you're going to obviously get the flow chart and test this yourself to be exactly sure you're testing the right thing, but I'm giving you this in a nutshell because I had to pull teeth to figure out everything about this and which direction to go. So you're going to check continuity between one wire and the next wire, and then the other wire and the next wire. If you have continuity, then it's saying that all the motor cables are correct, they're good, and that the stator is okay, and to continue on with the testing. So the next step is really confusing. The next step says remove PCU assembly. What is the PCU assembly? Well, if you don't watch this video to figure it out and you don't work on Honda hybrids, it takes you a long time. It took me about an hour of going back and forth between flowchart and repair procedures and teardowns and all kinds of stuff to understand that the PCU assembly is this whole guy right here. Right here. So this is the PCU assembly. And this is on the passenger side behind the seat of the hybrid. So on the driver's side is the battery, and then the cables connect over. And then this is, there's multiple computers, and when I get it back together, I'll show you. I just got the computer, and so I'll be putting this together. And when I put it back in the car, I'll explain everything. But right here is a module that bolts from here to here, and that module is called the MCM module, the motor current module. And it looks like this. It's got 3 connectors, a 32-pin connector, one in the middle and then one on the other side. This one here comes from the battery side, so you disconnect that, and then these 2 are still connected. So I took this out for testing purposes because the testing purposes, which I'll show you, are pretty much checking continuity between that MCM module and what's really confusing is this black module right here, which is called the MPI module. It's the battery control module or the inverter. It's so confusing that even when we had the name, the MPI module, it came up in the flowchart from Honda, replace MPI module. And when we tried to call Honda for the deal, for the part, they said the inverter? And well, it doesn't say it's the inverter, it says it's the MPI module. So what I found after researching this thing and Googling it and going back and forth between repair procedures, it's called the MPI module or the inverter or the battery control module. So it's what controls the charging of the battery and everything else. So I'll show you right now what it looks like when you have to test these wires. Let's check it out. All right, so here is the back side of the PCU and the Honda hybrid. This is the MPI module or the battery control module right here. So this is with the cover off, is what it looks like here. So whenever you're testing for this code, the MCM module mounts here. I'll show you where that goes. From the front, there's 2 10mm bolts right here, and there's 3 connectors. One of them is still inside the car. I'll show you when we put this back in, but here's 2 of them. So for this P1440, here is the 32-pin connector right here, okay? You need to disconnect that. The whole reason for this whole job right here is to figure out what's the cause of the P1440. Well, the final test on this, I'm going backwards because I already have it apart, is to disconnect this connector here. I took this module out just to make this connector easier to get to. Here's the module right here. It sits like this, okay? So this connector over here is inside the car. So here's those other 2 connectors, and it goes like this with the 2 10mm right there, all right? So for this testing purposes, you need to access this 32-pin connector, and on this MPI, there is 1 connector here. I disconnected it because I'm going to be replacing it. And this connector here. Now the final testing for this code is this right here. You need to access this connector, a 9-pin connector, okay? And this 32-pin connector. You're going to be checking continuity between, I think, 8 wires, 7 or 8 wires, and they go from this connector to this connector. And as long as you have continuity between this connector and this connector, it means that the harness is good. And then the next step is to test all those same wires to ground. So you're going to go to ground. I went right here because this is where the case is grounded. So I went here, and you're making sure that none of those wires are shorted to ground inside this PCU assembly. So I'll show you this when we put it back together. I'll show you what it looks like. I'll show you what the other side looks like. But this is the battery control module, or the MPI module. These Hondas are pretty confusing because the information is not very accurate, and they don't really like to tell you a whole lot. When you look up one thing, they tell you to remove the PCU, and you don't really know what the PCU is until you follow a whole bunch of flowcharts. So that's what it looks like right there. Once I get the module, I'll replace it. As I put it back together, I'll explain everything, and I'll tell you all about the testing. So here is, on all data, this is the testing right here. So, all right, so that was the last test right there, testing the motor stator and the wires, all right? So we'll get to that when I put it back together. I'll show you how to test that. But right here, this is saying that the motor power cables are disconnected. The MCM connector, which is that small module that I showed you I had off, and the MPI module, those are all disconnected. So here's the first test. You're gonna pin test these from one connector to the next. Okay, as long as you have continuity. That also shows you the diagram of how they are right there, of how they're listed. That shows you how to test it. Easiest thing to do is to follow that right there, because it shows you the pin numbers and the wire colors. If you notice, all the wire colors are the same, green to green, white to white, gray to gray, because all you're doing is testing the harness. And then you're gonna come down here, and then so here are all the wires okay? Is there continuity? Yes. We're gonna go to the next step, which is here, and this is checking for a shorted wire. So you're gonna do the same thing. You're gonna test in a 32 pin connector, those same 6 wires, you're gonna test those to ground to make sure they're not shorted to ground. If they aren't, and there's no continuity. Now remember right here it says, is there continuity? If there is, well, you have a short in the harness, and then you would be replacing the harness. If there's not, replace the MPI module, which is the inverter, the battery control module. It has lots of names, but it's the MPI module. All right, let me wait for this module, and I'll get the rest of this going. Okay, so here is the car with the hybrid, with the PCU out. So, a couple things. This one connector here, this goes to that MCM module up top. That one stays out. You got to disconnect that. Easier to show you what you have to disconnect while it's out. You got a blue connector that plugs in here. These are the 3 wires here for the stator, and these go up to the transmission. You got this connector here, and you got this 12-volt connection here. So this all goes under the PCU as it goes in. Let's see. You got one connector right here. You got a ground that goes here. I'll show you that when I get it in. And there's one more ground over here. I think it's here. I'll show you when I get it in. And that's pretty much it. And there's 2 nuts at the top that hold this thing on. The 2 bolts at the bottom, the cover bolts through there. So those stay. Those don't go on. What else? Okay, that's it in here. Batteries over there. So now let's look at what this PCU looks like all put back together. Oh yeah, there's one more here. Right here, for looks like for the blower motor. Okay. All right. So here's the PCU all put back together. So there was no bolt here and no bolt here. So you got to make sure that you notate. What I did was I put a pink dot on each one that I disconnected to undo this bus bar to take it out. Here's where those 3 motor stator cables come in right here. Now the stickers fall off labeling them, so what I did was I put a 1 dot on the one on this side, and then 2 on this side, and then 3, and you can see I have 1, 2, 3 dots, 2 dots, 1 dot. One of the stickers already came off during testing. Just make sure you get all your connectors plugged back in before you put this in. That's about it. There's the ground. There's the cables from underneath. There's the MCM. From the back side, doesn't really look like much. You got the inverter cover. You got your wire harness that comes around here. Plugs into 2 connectors on your MPI. That's about it. All right, let me get this in. I'll show you what it looks like. There's a few more things to hook back up. Let's go. Okay, so I started to put this back in and I realized I forgot something. So I forgot this junction block right here. So here's the junction block. And the junction block's gonna sit right there. And one of the bolts are gonna be there. And then you have a bolt right here. No, this is where one of the cables comes in. You got a bolt there, and those 4 bolts. And that's it. To take this out. Comes out just like that. One of the high voltage cables comes in here. And then the other one goes here. I'll show you that when I have it back in. But you got 2 bolts on the perimeter, 4 bolts on the perimeter, and then the one here. All right. Okay, so I'm trying to tell you this as I go along. You got this cable here, which goes to the MCM, okay? We got 1 high voltage cable that goes there, and the other one that comes in here. I'll show you those when I get those together. You got this connector here. You got this connection here that goes right there. You got the ground right there. You got this white connector here. You got the other ground over here. You got the blue connection there. I think that's about in here. All right, let me get this in and I'll show you the high voltage cable. Okay, so here everything's back together. You got your U, V, and W wires hooked up. You got the 12 volt clip here. It's fastened on. This is connected. We have this little cover here that covers these terminals here. So this is where one of the high voltage cables comes in, and it goes over behind there. The other one comes in here, and it goes right here to the junction block. And then this clips on. We have a plastic clip that holds that on, right here. Then the only other thing that's left is right here. There's this metal cover, or it goes this way, and covers up these junction wires. And then from there, we're gonna just basically put this cover back on and then flip the high voltage switch and turn it on and check it out. All right, let's go. All right, here we go running. It's been running for about 10 minutes and no lights. Before, within 5 seconds of starting the gas engine, all the Christmas tree, the whole dash would light up. We'll come here and we'll go here. We'll go permanent codes, no codes. We'll just double check. Oh, I did temporary. Now we'll check permanent. No codes. All right, this is good to go. Go on a test drive. Let's roll. All right. So one disclaimer that I want to make sure that you understand is I'm working with a high voltage system. This is a hybrid, and it has orange cables, which means that it has the potential to kill you. So you should wear your protective equipment. Take precautions where you need to. Follow your training manuals. Don't go touching orange cables and disconnecting things just because I did, because this is the vehicle that I'm working on with my experience, and my health is in my hands. So you make sure that before you go touching orange cables or anything like that, that you check them to make sure that there is no voltage there. You saw that I wasn't wearing gloves. Well, that's because I used my meter to make sure that there was no voltage on any of the cables before I touched them and disconnected them. So I'll show you my meter and I'll show you the leads you need to test for that. But please make sure that you don't go and start disconnecting things just because you saw me do it, because it can be very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. You need to make sure you follow the proper safety precautions. All right, so here's my meter, my snap-on meter. And you'll see down here, it covers Cat 2 and Cat 3. And then if you look here at my leads are Cat 3 and Cat 4 compatible. So you got to make sure that your leads are compatible, and so is your meter. If your meter is not compatible to read a hybrid voltage, then it'll basically be a plasma bomb and it'll blow up. So what I did was I took my meter and I put it on voltage, and I touched all the orange cables before I touched anything and disconnected anything to make sure there was no voltage hanging out. So remember, those numbers right there, got to make sure your leads and your meter cover that. Okay, so in this video, I'm not trying to tell you exactly how this whole system works and how every component works, because I didn't delve too deep into it to need to try to figure out what operates what and how it all works. I can figure it out, it's not a problem. I just don't work on these, and so I only dove in to see what I needed to do what I needed to do in this case. And I really wanted to let you guys know how simple it is. I tried researching this before for the last one, and the videos are really in-depth and there's way too much information. So if you're really trying to figure out how the whole system works, great. But if you got a 1440 and you clear the code and only a 1440 returns, this one, within 5 seconds of running, the minute you start the engine, it sets the code. So if you're trying to figure that out, this is the video for you. I'm going to show you how to do all of that. Well, I showed you how to do all of that and explain how what everything is, so you understand, so you don't have to go back and forth and pull teeth to try to figure it out. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you don't work on hybrids, or if you don't work on Honda hybrids, you never worked on one before, and you got this code and you're not afraid to get in there and really try, this video is going to help you out. It's going to help you get there. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell. You get notified of all my future content, which you're definitely going to want to see. Also check me out on Instagram at Nuts and Bolts with Tone for my daily life as a mechanic. See you next time.